Hello and welcome to the Growing Leaders Podcast. And Christine, we're back to talk about the same thing we always talk about, which is how we can grow a next generation of leaders. And of course, it's really, really important in the business world. We've talked about it in the church world for sure. It's important for young people. But today we're talking about something that's really, really important to young people. What are we talking about today?
Being evangelized, or the inside of being evangelized.
So the inside of evangelism is our title. And so what do you mean by that? It sounds weird.
Well, we often talk about evangelism, let's go do it. But you don't always hear insight or feedback or the perspective of someone who's been evangelized. So today we have a special guest that we know pretty well, who over the last several years has really been evangelized into relationship with Jesus. And I just had some interesting insights. She kind of grew up in and around the church her whole life, but had never really connected with a church or with the Lord. And so she offers really interesting perspective.
Yeah, and that's something that we touched on a few episodes ago, just how to save a life, of that we don't really talk about ministry that much. And yet it's really, really the part that's most exciting, the part of where Jesus walks into our lives or walks into somebody else's life. And we've touched on before in previous episodes the fact that it's hard to find equipping resources or any training on how to do this stuff, but it's the really, really beautiful stuff. So we're going to try to participate in changing that a little bit with the Love Your City Conference, which is June 1st through 3rd, yes. 2023.
Yes.
How will that conference help me if I want to go to it, because I want to learn how to make a difference?
Our conference theme this year is Living a Life of Love, which is really just the fundamentals of ministry. And so we'll go over just like a day of ministry. One, you'll be ministered to. Then we're going to talk about Love Your City, kind of then going out and doing ministry. And then there's going to be a day of commissioning where we're going out together into ministry. And then at the end of that last day, there'll be a commissioning.
Yeah, that sounds fun. And if you're interested in coming, please come and please bring friends. And you can go to boywiththeball.com and find more information about that. One thing as we get ready to talk to our guest today is one of the tools that actually we'll talk about at the conference is a way to look at how each person, including you, Christine, and me, and Rocky over there, who's our production.
Hi, Rocky.
Hi, Rocky. That's right. Go Solar Bear. But basically how each one of us kind of moves towards learning to make a difference. And one of the reasons that it is so difficult to learn how to make a difference is nobody breaks it down for you. And so people just, you turn off Netflix where you've watched an inspirational story and you go out to make your own Netflix movies, but then you start tripping over yourself and nobody is really, really helping you. So consumption to consequence is I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stages or 6 phases of moving into that. And the first one is consumption. What do you know about consumption?
I mean, one, it's in the word, you're consuming. So it's very much about you. And so it is not helpful to the people around you.
Yeah.
And so it's hurting others, but then it's very much just feeding your need to consume.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could say, well, if we're trying to talk about how to make a difference in others' lives, why would you start by making a difference in a negative way? But it is where a lot of us start. And sometimes we don't mean it. Sometimes it's real nice church people who are big time gossips, or very judgmental and attacking. But other times it can be, the things you see in movies of predatorial behaviors as well, where hurting people hurt people.
I would also, this may be very too spicy to say.
Here we go.
But I think in regards to ministry, oftentimes evangelism can come from a place of consumption where it's out of your need to be heard or your need to accomplish something, which is where we fail very quickly in ministry.
No, a lot of people are doing ministry so that their church can grow or get a notch on a belt or to have a great story. Or a lot of it can be to prove they're right and that somebody else is wrong. So you're totally right. But consumption comes from a place where there's a hole in your heart. And instead of finding Jesus to fill it, you actually hurt people to fill it. So that's consumption. Next, complacency. I'll tee it up and then we'll love to hear what you think. But this is interesting. It's where there's a hole in your heart, but you don't go to Jesus to fill it. You find other things that fill it. So that could be romance novels. That could be gardening. That could be, of course, Netflix. We vilify that all the time. But it also can be endless church services that don't really lead me into a life of obedience. They just make me feel like I'm doing great.
Accomplishing something.
Yeah. Anything else about complacency?
Again, it's very you-centric.
It is. You're right. Not me. Oh my
You.
gosh, this is crazy. Why couldn't we have talked about this before we got on the podcast?
You as the person who is being complacent.
Okay, generic you.
Yes.
All right. So then finally you recognize, oh, I'm really struggling. I don't have what I need. And there's coming home or conversion. It's where you meet Jesus. And that's where everything changes. And actually that is an amazing part of ministry. Ministry is either ministry to you where you're meeting Jesus in some way. He's touching your life, or ministry is where he's reaching through you. But coming home has to happen in your life. You have to meet him before you can participate in his life flowing through you. So that's that one. I'm going to skip to the next one.
Yeah, let's go.
For the sake of time, from coming home, we get to compassion. One time, a young lady you and I both know, I was standing at a school with her and she was looking around. She'd just gotten off a plane. She was looking around at everybody around her. And she was like, it was students on a campus. She said, I don't have compassion for any of these people. And I said, oh, okay, that's okay. That just means you're still on fire. You know, when you're on fire drowning, you don't have compassion. So you can tell you've come home and that it's gotten to a real depth for you when all of a sudden you're okay and you're alive and you've made it out of the fire. And now you're thinking, what about those other guys? Mm-hmm. And so coming home keeps going. The love of God keeps pouring into you until it finally reaches some moment in the compassion level where all of a sudden you're like, what about them? Mm-hmm. Anything about that?
I think the compassion one's really interesting because oftentimes we think compassion comes immediately after the coming home or the meeting Jesus, but it really is a process of coming out of being complacent to then what it means to really follow Jesus into ministry. And then compassion comes with that, where the things that keep you up at night are not your things, but it's the things of the people around you. Like the burdens aren't like, oh, how am I doing? Or, oh, Lord, please help me with this one thing. But it's like, oh, Lord, please help this person or these people.
That's perfect. Yeah. So now you get to the point where now you're motivated to actually go out to minister or to make a difference. And we call this next phase care. And the funniest part about this one is people think the moment they go out to make a difference that they will make a difference. But care, which is why the conference is Living a Life of Love, it takes a lifetime to get better and better and better and better at it. And really churches should. Some churches are complacency factories. Sorry to say it. You can text me with threats. But what a church should be is a care training facility where we're learning how to do better and better and better through multiple repetitions of getting out there to love our neighbors and love other people.
I mean, I think you said it all.
I think I said it all. And the final one is?
Consequence.
And what's that mean?
It's interesting. I always, growing up the way that I grew up, consequences were bad. But consequences are really just the outcome or the byproduct of behaviors. And so if the behavior inputs are good, if it's coming out of compassion and from care, then and like a place of being led by the Holy Spirit, then the consequences are beautiful. It's meaningful. It's the fruit of all of the seed.
You were right. And today is exciting. We're going to have our good friend Rebekah Yoder on, who's been a team member within the Boy with the Ball Global and Boy with the Ball team here in Atlanta. And we're going to get a chance to jump into an actual story of not just ministry happening through me or me telling you stories or you telling us stories, but really hearing somebody from the other side of what Rebekah was going through.
What was it like for her?
Yeah, let's get to it.
Hey, Rebekah, it's great to have you with us.
Hi, thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
So Rebekah, for those of you listening or watching, is a big part of our team here, on the global team here in Atlanta for Boy with the Ball, and has been the last few years. But her story is really interesting because she was kind of adjacent to lots of Boy with the Ball things or church things, and then kind of came alongside and then had a pretty significant experience with the Lord.
But she's also, we office in Lawrenceville, Georgia. She's the only one of us who was born and raised in Lawrenceville. Too.
It is. She's one of the very few people who can say she was born and raised in Lawrenceville.
Homegrown.
Yes.
That's right.
So it's great to have you with us, Rebekah.
Thank you.
Hi, Rebekah.
Hi.
We've done very little preparation for today, so I'm going to let you in a little secret of what we're talking about today. Today, we're calling it On the Inside of Evangelism. So
Love
usually you talk about evangelism, it's talking about like, oh, I did this and this worked. But you actually can offer some interesting insight as someone who's been evangelized over the last few years into lots of kingdom things. And so
Yes.
it's part of why we invited you on.
Yeah, and let's speak really clear about what evangelism is, because evangelism doesn't have a really great name right now. But evangelism really just is about sharing the evangel, which the evangel, in Spanish we say the evangelio. It's the gospel. So it's really somebody sharing who Jesus is to you in a way that leads toward you being born again, though that doesn't always happen in one moment. It really, and that actually, I think in our conversation today, we'll realize that it doesn't always happen in one moment, but that's beautiful. Why that would have a bad name is crazy, but really it's about ministering or turning and loving people in a way that pushes them towards, that either allows them to encounter God or pushes them towards an encounter with God.
I liked what you just said there, because I think part of why it can get a bad name or get a bad rap, it's just where it's done poorly.
Yes.
Which goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where it's the complacency or consumption, where it becomes so much about you as a person versus what the Lord's doing in somebody else. But these are all things you have insight on. And so to start us off, I have sort of laying the groundwork. But when we met you in 2018?
Yes.
18? Had you ever heard of Jesus before?
I had.
Okay.
Oh,
Bumper sticker.
I was a small child.
Oh.
Way more than bumper stickers.
Okay, so you knew who Jesus was,
Yes.
but had you, would you say that you were a believer or walking with the Lord at that point?
I knew that Jesus existed. I had never gotten to the point in my life where I was totally 100% sure that he was not real. I knew he was real. I had even seen him real for other people. I did not believe that he was real for me. And I did not even fully grasp the concept yet of what having a relationship with Jesus meant. So to me, like, Jesus was someone who was at church. And so you would go to church and like maybe people would talk about Jesus or sing songs about him or whatever. But then you go home and you go about your week, and then that's kind of the end of it. So yeah, I would say that I knew who he was, but I didn't even like him, to be honest. I didn't really think that he was someone that I even wanted to walk with.
And
let me just pop in right there, because this is a first really cool glimpse to say is that, you know, in the missionary world, they're always saying, how do you get to a country that's never heard the gospel? And I remember at one point being in Costa Rica, which supposedly had been evangelized, and realizing how many people didn't know Jesus. And they were like, but we should send no missionaries here. And I was like, what are you talking about? There's people that don't know Jesus.
they're a Christian country.
Yeah. And so sometimes, like in your background, grew up in church, was going to church along the way in different points of your journey. A lot of people would be like, okay, well, she's one of the ones that we got her for Jesus, but like let's go find these other people that are like in some other area. But one thing that's really, really true is there's a lot of people flowing in and out of churches that are really struggling to find Jesus or to connect with Jesus or to even know good things about Jesus. You know, we were with somebody earlier today that was talking about God's really impressing on them, taste and see that the Lord is good. There are a lot of people hovering in and around churches that have not tasted and seen that he's good. So I think that comes out right there in already what you've shared, Rebekah.
Yeah. My follow-up question to what you were saying was, what do you think led to that belief or lack of belief? That like did you want to follow him or did you not? Or did you like him? Like, so you kind of grew up in and around church. You grew up in and around church things, but you find yourself 28 years old, a part of a church, but then you're so really unsure of just like, oh, do I like this guy Jesus? Like, what do you think led up to that moment in your life? Or where do you think it went awry?
Yeah, it went wrong probably when I was a kid. I never could grasp how, in my brain, I was watching God allow all of these bad things to happen. And it didn't feel like he was doing anything about it. And so I didn't think I could trust him because I was watching all of these things happen. When I was younger, like really little, I had a speech impediment situation. I don't totally know how to verbalize it or explain it, but I had a really difficult time speaking. And so it was more than a stutter. It was where I would try to say words and the words just wouldn't come out. And so that put me in a lot of really weird and really embarrassing situations for a pretty good chunk of my young life. And so I remember I had a prayer journal. My parents had us do like little prayer journals, and we would write down our prayer requests and we would pray every night. And every single night I had my speech problem written down in my prayer journal, and we would pray that he would take it away, and he never did. And as a kid, I couldn't understand that, because it was something that put me in, like I said, weird situations. People were unkind to me about it. There was even a moment I graduated from high school, and I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class, and lucky me, I had to give a speech on graduation night, and I was terrified. I was so worried that something was going to go wrong. And I remember praying and asking the Lord to help me, and asking for everything to be okay. And I got up on the stage and I started trying to give my speech, and the first word wouldn't come out. And it took a couple, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 seconds. So in the grand scheme of things, not a crazy amount of time, but it took a second for me to get the word out. And I felt like God had left me. I felt like I was standing up on that stage alone, and he had walked away. And that's probably the moment right there that was really the beginning of the end for me, where I thought, okay, I prayed, I asked him for something, he didn't give it to me, and it was in a position where I really needed help. Why couldn't he have answered that prayer? So that was a really huge moment in my life. And then several years later, I went through a broken engagement, and that was also really difficult. And I couldn't understand why it happened. I couldn't understand. I was blaming the Lord for allowing it to happen, and for not letting it go well, or for not letting things be different. And so I couldn't understand why he would allow some of the things that he allowed, such as those 2 examples. And so because of that, specifically after the broken engagement, that was kind of the last straw for me. And I thought, I'm done. I really don't want much to do with the Lord, because I don't really think he has my best interest in mind, and I don't think I can trust him, and I don't think he cares about me. So that was really the moment when I pretty much just walked away from him and began living my life, not even trying to really be close to him.
Yeah, jumping in here again, Christine, before you go after the next question, this happens a lot, and in a way, this is where the way churches have functioned up till this point often struggles to reach the next generation, because it's kind of, in the early church, Jesus would walk in. I mean, in the very early church, before it was actually the church, in the Bible, in the Evangels, in the Gospels, Jesus walks in and he does a bunch of stuff where there's interaction with somebody, and they're either healed or touched, or they're not condemned and they're picked up off the ground. And then these people have an experience that's so significant that then it's real, and they taste and see this good, and they follow him. And so then the early church has an experience with the Holy Spirit that makes them the church, and now he's doing that through them. And there's still so many stories of people coming into an encounter where they believe. It's a missionary encounter where they hear and they believe. But then about the year 300, where Constantine declares the Roman Empire Christian and the Roman Catholic Church begins, now you are kind of born into Christianity. You're baptized as a baby. You go into, just because you were born in this town or in this empire, now you're a Christian. And granted, the Reformation changes it a little bit, where now it becomes about still choices, and it's a little different, but there's still infant baptism, and there's still this idea, because you grow up in church, you know him. And so now your experience is very modern and very different than that, but it's also not that different, because you go to Sunday school, you've got your prayer journal, you go to a Christian school, you're the valedictorian of a Christian school, for goodness sake. I mean, talk about holy. You're practically floating. Yeah, no, just kidding. But from that perspective, like in Christianity, we've just acted like if we put good Christian kids around the Bible and Christian things, they're just going to get it. But it's not about the Bible, and it's not about Christian churches, and it's not about Christian schools. It's about Jesus. And now the Bible's about Jesus, so that's very helpful, but it's still about Jesus. And we've not we talked about we haven't gotten good at ministry, but we also haven't gotten good at allowing or helping or participating in really beautiful encounters between people and Jesus. And so you were waiting for Jesus to come within that model. He in a way wasn't meeting you there to kind of lead you out into a place where he would one day reach your heart. But
Yes.
man, it's not fun. And then because it's not fun, all of a sudden you start making choices because you can't choose him, and guilt and shame and stuff starts to pile on you. And that's all of our stories. But then you like him even less. Right?
Exactly.
I have so many thoughts.
Uh-oh.
But I have a question, and this
Okay.
isn't a condemning question. This is not directed toward you at all. But how many churches would you say you went to in your from childhood, from like where some of this hurt happened to then till 2008?
Wow. That is a really hard question. I would imagine, gosh, I would say at least 30, 40. So many.
Lot.
I'm asking that because I think in the church there's a lot of assumption of inherited Christianity, which some of what you were just talking about, even just like now if you're born into this place, now you're okay, you're dubbed a Christian. Okay, it's like being knighted. Okay, you're a Christian. Good job. But to be having been around 30 or 40 churches in about 30 years of your life, and then just kind of having gone through all those, and then it's just like, oh, she goes to church, went to a Christian school, she must be a good Christian. She knows who Jesus is.
Yes.
I think that is a huge fault of the church today, and why we're not reaching the next generation. And we heard some of this too when we had Joey and Molly on a few episodes back on like why the current generation is leaving the church right out of college. But it's because we never had their hearts. Rebekah, I would say, the church never had your heart
No,
up until that
not
point.
at all.
And so then that's actually the byproduct where you ended up, where you're almost 30 years old and where your life was at that point, is the byproduct of having never been reached in all of those earlier years. And then
Yes.
what struck me is how quickly, so young, something can go wrong and lies can come in and corrupt the narrative, and still be wrestling with that so many years later.
Yes.
And to be fair, and we'll get to a question for you, Rebekah. Sorry, we're just having a great time here.
Great.
To be fair, God uses all that.
Yeah.
Like when somebody does get reached, whatever you went through, he uses. So there's God's purpose in it all. But a lot of it is that nobody ever walked into your story and somehow said words that penetrated your heart, where you kind of knew it was him talking, and all of a sudden your eyes are filling with tears, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to jump your question with my own. Is that all right? Do you know where you're going?
I did know where I was going next, but I'd like to hear where
Let's
you're
know.
going.
I want to hear where you're going.
Well, I was going to hear where things changed. Like, what changed?
That was what I was going to say. This is perfect. I was like, well, when did tears fill your eyes?
Yeah.
Yeah, you go ahead. You ask it. You're
Oh,
better
no,
at
I
this.
think it's great. Go. I've asked the other ones.
Okay, so yeah, you heard our question, Rebekah. When did it change? Or like how, I got to be with you one night when your parents invited you to a Chipotle fundraiser for Boy of the Ball. But I would love to hear from your perspective, when did that start to change? How? And then we'll ask questions.
Yeah. I was at a point. So in 2018, when I met you guys and the Boy with the Ball team, I was at a point where my life wasn't working and I knew it. I was making a lot of decisions that were not helping me. I was very isolated. I was very broken, and I had gotten to the point where I knew something had to be different. And the only thing I knew to do was to start going to church again. But I didn't like church, so it wasn't necessarily helping me. So that was where I was when I met you guys. And I remember walking into the Chipotle, and my parents were in there. They had started attending Covenant Life, and they told me that this event was happening and invited me to go with them. And Jamie, you and Kathy were the first people that I talked to when I walked in. And I just remember as I walked up, Jamie, you told me, you said, we've really enjoyed getting to know your parents, but we're also really excited to get to know you. And 5 years later, I still vividly remember that conversation because it was the kindest and most intentional thing someone had said to me in such a long time, who was a complete stranger and who had no idea the baggage that I was carrying and the brokenness that I was experiencing. But you were very genuine in seeming like you wanted to know me. And I didn't understand that. But it was cool. I really liked it. And then I met Anna. And so I sat with her, my parents and I sat with her for a little while at dinner. And she was the same way. She was very intentional. She asked me questions. We didn't get into any deep or intense conversations, but just started getting to know me and asking questions about me, about my life, about my job, things like that. And I don't necessarily remember thinking a whole lot about that interaction with all of you. I just remember thinking, oh, this was nice. And then kind of went on about my life because I didn't necessarily think that there was anything that could come from it. Like I wasn't going to the church. I wasn't involved in anything. So I just kind of moved on. But then I kept randomly running into Anna. I would be like walking into Kroger and she would be walking out. And there was one time I was walking by somewhere and she and someone else were sitting at an outdoor patio having dinner at a restaurant. And there were just some funny moments where I just ran into her a couple of times. And she had gotten my phone number at Chipotle. And one day she just randomly texted me and said, hey, we're going to be doing this kids camp down in Norcross, and we would really love for you to come. And I was very interested. I was kind of to the point where I had seen Anna enough to think, okay, she seems pretty nice. I didn't really have a lot of close friends because the way my life looked, it just was not something that I did not want to have people close to me because that would require having to talk about what was going on in my life. And I just was not interested in doing that. But again, I also knew my life wasn't working. So I thought, okay, maybe Anna could be someone that I could be friends with. And so I went to the camp, really enjoyed it. I love kids. I'm a teacher. So anything that involves kids, I'm usually going to be really excited to be a part of. And so I really had a great time the day of the camp. I met a lot of the Boy with the Ball team members. Everybody was very kind and very friendly and very welcoming. And then after that, then I started hearing more about Love Your City and hearing more about the tutoring center and all of that. And that's when I really jumped in starting to volunteer. But I hadn't had a lot of really deeper, more real conversations with anyone yet. And there was one Saturday after walkthroughs, Anna and I stayed back at the office, and she told me her story. It's kind of out of nowhere. She had mentioned that she'd wanted to get to know me. And so she just started sharing with me her story. I had my picture and perspective of church people, for lack of a better way to say it, was that everybody had all their ducks in a row and everybody's life was perfect and there had never really been any hardship and everyone was just really amazing. And there was no way that I could ever measure up to that. But then when I heard Anna's story, obviously her story was not that story of being a perfect church person who looks down and judges other people. That was not what her story was. Her story was also sharing places where she had come out of pretty deep brokenness, but how she had really met the Lord through that. And I had never heard anything like that before. She talked about how she had an encounter with Jesus, and I had never heard of anyone really having that type of experience before. And so that was probably the moment right there where I thought, wow, I wonder if that could be me too. I wonder if something could happen and if things could change for me. And then I shared a little bit. I wasn't ready to be totally open yet, but I did share pieces of my story, and I shared enough with her so that she would know that I was not in a good place with the Lord and that I wasn't totally sure about who he was and if I really wanted to have a relationship with him or not. But that was probably, hearing her story was probably the moment that I saw a little bit of a light bulb go on in the sense of thinking, maybe I don't have to be in this brokenness forever. Maybe there is a way out.
This is pretty amazing. There's a lot of great stuff. There is no gimmick to this, and I was around as you were reached, so I know there's no gimmick.
Yes.
I mean, I think one of the keys on our side of it is that there was no gimmick. Like, we really, really love people. Mm-hmm. And then if you're waking up in the morning and you're pursuing him throughout your day, your heart does fill with a compassion where when you see people, two things happen. One is that you see what they're capable of. Like you get a sense of like, oh, this person's this, or this person's got this quality to them. But then you might also be able to pick up a little bit of like, but they're hurting a little bit. And sometimes that's an easy thing just to think of anybody. When I meet anybody and I think they're great, I still probably think they probably are hurting a little bit. So you almost have an automatic compassion and excitement and thought of what could God do with us together. And not how would Rebekah join our thing, but what could we become together, even just as friends, even as outside of anything we're already doing. So that makes it easy to be really, really genuine. And it also makes it really, really easy to appear friendly and hospitable or welcoming because you just genuinely feel that way. The secret to appearing that way is to be that way. Yeah, don't fake it. So then nobody invites you to church, which is, first of all, great. There's no price tag where you're like, oh, that's why they're being nice to me. But then I love the part where you just thought, oh, this is nice, but you didn't necessarily think a lot about it, which is perfect because it would be really easy to scare you away if there's this dramatic experience the first time you meet everybody, you know?
Right.
It's like we always say that deer don't drink water out of waterfalls. You go to a nice calm pool where you can approach it as you want, you know? So that's really, really cool. And then what's interesting is then you're not invited into a church again. You're invited into a kind of a different place, a third place, you know, or a significantly other place. And it's around something that you really already care about, which is making a difference. It's something beautiful to you. And that's just so great. You're able to, on those days, to start to belong before you believe. And you play you're given an opportunity to play a really meaningful part that you're uniquely skilled to do before anything's asked of you. It's kind of funny. Something is asked of you. You're asked to share your skills and your life, but none of it's a religious transaction or none of it's taking you back to church, which isn't that church is bad, but where you're coming from, there's certainly something that's got to be healed before you could get there. And the other thing that I think is just really, really key is it's all centers around friendship. Like there's a lot of friendship being offered and vulnerability. And final point, and then I'll give it to you, Christine, is that the opportunity of then out of friendship, part of friendship is we hear each other's stories. But when you're friends with somebody whose life has been changed by the power of Jesus, that story, which is totally their right to share. It's not pushy for them to share their story. Is a story that could give hope to a person who's hungry. Now, Anna's probably shared that story with 100 times, a bunch of people that didn't respond the way you did, where it hit your heart and something in you. You didn't necessarily say that day, thank you, Anna, now everything's changed. But it hit your heart, right? It was good soil. And then what's really, really interesting is just then what starts to happen next, because you hear in it hope, and you hear in it really the gospel. Like in that story, the essence of the gospel, that it's not by works, but it's by Jesus coming and laying his life down for you, and that Jesus touches people, and that Jesus loves people past brokenness, and Jesus redeems, and Jesus is the Lord and has overcome sin and death. Like you hear in a way all of that in a hidden way and in a story, just because it's what happened to her, and it conveys to you it could happen to me too, which is where you left us. So.
I have a silly question. Well, it's not silly. It's going to come off as silly, or I don't know.
The silliest question, Christine, is the one you never ask.
So, I don't know the right word for it. Maybe facetious is the word I'm looking for. I don't know. But so you come to Chipotle, you meet some people, they share their story. You're like, oh, they're kind of cool. They seem authentic-ish enough. That's summer of 2018, but everything changed. Everything's fixed by the end of the summer.
No.
Like 2, I think we got her done in 2 weeks. Just kidding.
What was the process or the journey for you in that? And I realize it's years of process, but I think sometimes I'm asking this question because we're talking about on the inside of evangelism. Oftentimes it's like, oh, I'm going to go do outreach and meet someone and share my story, check a box, they're saved.
Get her done.
Yeah. And it's not that. It's a process. So what was some of the process for you?
How long would you say the process took of you first meeting everybody and you ever showing up at a church? Like what was the time span?
Wow. I met you guys. I came to Chipotle in February of 2018. Okay. And then summer of 2018 is when I started volunteering with Boy with a Ball.
Okay.
I didn't start going to church until Easter of 2019.
Mm.
So, I mean, it was not something that I jumped into quickly. For me, friendship was really what it was. I think if people had invited me to go to church, I think I would have freaked out and run away, because I was going to a church, and it was like my box to check to say that I was going. It wasn't necessarily doing anything for me, in the sense that I wasn't open enough to the Lord yet to really allow anything to change or be different. But what started happening as 2018 continued to progress was that all of you guys were just my friends. There was no pressure. Like, Anna would text me and say, "Hey, we're all hanging out at Kathy's house. Why don't you come?" And it was wild to me that a group of people that had all been together for a pretty significant amount of time were so open to letting other people come and join in with them. It wasn't cliquish or exclusive or anything like that. And so that's what really helped me to start really seeing everybody. Like, Pete and Christine invited me to the Friendsgiving at y'all's house, and then the mug exchange, the Christmas thing we did in December, and Nina would randomly text me and we'd hang out. And so there were all kinds of people who just really seemed to want to get to know me. And I had never experienced that before. But Anna was the only person at that point that I had really started to share a little bit about how I wasn't doing well and I wasn't sure about the Lord. And we would meet and, have dinner together or go do stuff together, and we would have conversations, but it wasn't like, I don't know if I was necessarily ready to explore the possibility of maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't know the Lord. Like, I wasn't ready to explore any of that. And then, so Boy with a Ball does team meetings every Friday night. And there was one evening we had all met for dinner, and then everybody was about to go up to the team meeting. And Anna said, "Hey, you should come to the team meeting." And I had heard, previously, when someone was talking about team meetings, they were talking about how people prayed at the team meetings, and that totally freaked me out. And so I told her, I was like, "Yeah, I don't think so. I'm not really doing very well with the Lord. And so it feels like a place that I shouldn't be." And Anna said, "It's probably exactly the place where you should be, but I understand." And I went home and didn't go. But then several months later, I got to a point where I felt like I was with all of you guys as friends, but I wanted more. I wanted to really get to know people better. I felt like I was missing something by not being a part of these team meetings. And so one day, it was before our Christmas fiesta down in Norcross, I texted Anna and I said, "So are you guys doing anything at the team meeting on Friday to plan for the fiesta? Is it a place that I could be?" Kind of try. And of course, Anna texted back and was like, "That would be great if you came. Like, that sounds awesome." But it was kind of my way to try to get in. Sure. And so I did. And it was fascinating because there was praying at the team meeting. And I've been to a lot of churches and just seen a lot of really uncomfortable things. And so being in a room of people praying and speaking in tongues and all of those things had really freaked me out before. But it was just very different when I went to the team meeting. And I remember just sitting there kind of watching it all and just being really amazed that people really knew the Lord and it wasn't weird. I don't know. I had never seen that before. And so then I kept coming. I kept going to the team meetings, and I then got invited to go to the Boy with the Ball team retreat in February. And that's when the whole team started hearing my story and started hearing where I was. And I didn't know if that would freak people out, if that would be something that was too much or too weird. And it just wasn't. Everybody was very encouraging and very open with me. Back. Everyone was very reciprocal. And so they were sharing things about their lives with me as I was sharing things about mine. And so it really, for me, just developed as lots of really close friendships. And then there came a point that I just kept wanting more. And I kept knowing that things, I really wanted things to change. You see, I had started touching people's stories where everyone was talking about how they had had an encounter with the Lord, and people just really loved Jesus and talked about him as if they knew him and he was their friend. And I was getting to the point where I wanted that so much, because he was not my friend. He was like an enemy that I didn't want anything to do with. And then eventually that's when I thought, okay, maybe I should start going to church. Maybe that would be another good step. I already know a lot of the people who go to the church, so it's not scary. But I was still really freaked out by church. And so I texted Anna and I said, okay, I'm thinking about going to church. And so then she ended up meeting me for breakfast that morning, because I truly was very scared.
You were a runner.
I was a runner. And so I was very, very nervous. But we had breakfast together and that helped. And then I did go to church. And then I was kind of on and off with the church for a little while, until probably later on in 2019. Later 2019. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of the question, but later in 2019. Okay. Later in 2019 was when I would say I had an encounter with the Lord where I met him, and the Lord told me that I had never chosen him before. And before he said that to me, he really showed me who he was. He showed me who Jesus was and what he did when he died on the cross, and how deeply important his death and resurrection is for my story and for my life, and how I don't have anything without that. And it was just a really significant, I was in a store when it happened. Like, I think I remember exactly where I was standing. Like, it was not, like, it was so significant that I remember it so vividly. Where I knew, like, yes, he is real. He is who all of these other people that have been talking about him, he is who they're saying he is. But it wasn't all of you guys that had to prove it to me. Like, I'm hearing all the stories and I'm hearing all that, but then Jesus came and proved himself to me himself. Which is amazing, because then it's not like the foundation of other people that I'm standing on, where it's other people took my hand and they led me to the Lord, which was huge. And then from there, that was when the Lord told me that I'd never chosen him. And that was a Sunday morning. And I'm thinking, okay, this is a huge step. So then I texted Anna and I asked her if we could pray after church. And then right after church, Jamie, Kathy, and Anna and I all went back to the office. And that was the moment when I prayed and accepted the Lord and chose him.
That's a great story.
It is.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story about a beautiful girl. And then it's also beautifully told, Rebekah. Well, great job today. Mm-hmm. That's not just insights, but that's like encouraging.
Now your story is recorded.
Now it's recorded.
Now there's going to be a sheep farmer in Sri Lanka listening to a podcast one night. It's like, I want it to happen to me.
Exactly.
Trying to figure out, what store did she go to? Was it Target?
What did she buy?
Target. What store was it?
It was Kohl's.
Kohl's.
Of all the
places.
No,
Kohl's. Yeah, you can. That'll happen to you at Kohl's.
That's the place.
All right. Well, good job. Thanks for sharing that with us. Oh my goodness, Christine, that was just stunning. Mm-hmm. First of all, we love Rebekah. She's the new Wonder Woman to me. But then it was just beautiful. But you were taking a lot of notes, and we were pressed for time, so you didn't get a chance to say them. So what were you thinking?
I have so many. They go in so many different directions. Okay. I think this is the beginning of a series. But I think I had a few things that stood out to me. One, I said it earlier, but inherited Christianity, that's just, I think, something really interesting we need to dive into at some point. Because she grew up in church. She had wonderful parents. But whether it was in her Christian school or youth leaders in the churches that she went to, there was a miss in ever capturing her heart. And so how do we do youth ministry or ministry for Sunday school, all these different things differently in a way that really helps capture a young person's heart, is a thought I had.
Will you lose the others?
No.
Okay, so that one's really interesting, because some people are going to listen to this and think that we would be diminishing church or stuff like that. No, not at all. In fact, it's actually saying if we really believe what we're saying, we would do it different. And so if Jesus is that powerful, then he's really, really pressing in on every child in the church. And he's really pressing in on every person. And rather than just running people through programs and acting like, they're just like being herded around and stuff like that, really intentionality is so key. And being able to ask questions or get in there or figure out whether it's working and it's hard. That's hard to do as a parent. But it can be hard to do. Certain parents have that tool set, others don't. But it's also really emotional for you, and you're kind of scared. Is it working for my children? So that's really where great children's church leaders, or it's where great elders in a church, or it's where a great pastor, or whether you as a couple are being discipled by somebody, that's a really great piece there. And then it's a really great reason for youth ministry and for summer camps and all that kind of stuff, is that if it's that real and that important, why would you not be talking intentionally about getting to the bottom of these things? And just so many people are floating through it, and people are assuming a bunch of stuff. And when you assume things,
You can't say it.
you can't say it, but it's not good.
It's no bueno. It made me think about it really for her and for me too. Like where it went wrong for me was I was very young. And then just very quickly, truth can get corrupted and then just never dealt with. And the Lord, your point was right. The Lord redeems all those things, and he has in my life and he has in Rebekah's. But more like in all of the churches she went to, they were misses. And not saying those are bad churches, but more like it's where we can assume a lot of things. And because they've shown up, check, or they went to a Christian school, check, or they come from a Christian family, check, they must be fine. We don't have to evangelize them. And that is, I think, a miss for the church. But one of the things that stood out to me most so significant is it was a significant process for her. And so I think often in ministry, we have serve days. I think churches are famous for serve days. Yes. I've been invited to many a serve day, which I like it. I don't want to hate on the serve day, but you can't accomplish evangelism in a serve day. Like that's, if you heard her story, it was a person or persons that walked with her through, like Jesus walking with the disciples, into finding truth and into going from having met Jesus and being unsure about him, is he a good dude or not, to then really knowing him. And it was in the coming to know him that then it was like, well, no, of course, yes. And then everything changed for her. But it was over a year. And that there's a cost to that. And I think that's where ministry sometimes goes wrong, is it's not convenient. It's incredible. Evangelism is incredibly inconvenient. Serve days are convenient, where you show up and you do something. Again, you check a box. But evangelism, true evangelism, is a process. Now, there are situations where something miraculous can happen very quickly, and it's a small gesture, and buying someone coffee, or turning and being obedient to the Spirit and just saying something, and that person comes online, something changes, and everything, their life changes very quickly. I'm not discounting those moments, but you can't build your entire ministry on the flip of a coin.
Oh my gosh, Christine. Yeah, so you're right. And the thing about it is, like, we in church with young people, we'll offer package programs. We'll buy a curriculum and we'll run them through it. It's not personal. It's not the way Jesus did it. But then we get mad at young people that it didn't work. And that's just crazy. The truth is we're not like Jesus. And so in that moment, they don't get Jesus. And so then that's the mess. But then if you think about the way it's not just that if you don't reach a young person, they don't get reached. Every single moment a kid sits in church bored out of their mind for a full hour, then leads to a bunch of hours at home where there's thoughts and guilt, and it's not working for me. And so very quickly in this equation, if you're not reaching them, the enemy starts to work, and he hits their thought life, and he starts to speak into their thought life. Then pretty quickly, they're not drawn to the shinier kids in the youth group or at school because they feel already a little negative about themselves. They get drawn in a little bit to the kids that are a little easier to relate to. They're usually the at-risk kids. Now they're being pulled in. Now they're starting to get other thoughts in their heads, other perspectives. The enemy can speak right through some of those kids because they've really been hurt. And then things start to go really bad. And the enemy is using every millisecond and using people who will relate and friends who will say, come spend the night, and bad guys who are just going after kids. So we offer a cute little program and it doesn't work. The enemy offers all this stuff. And it reminds me, I say this a lot, but Sherman's march to the sea here in the South was what broke the back of the Confederacy in the Civil War, because nobody could beat him in battles, really. But Sherman just starts going down from small town to small town. And not only does he destroy the opposing troops, but he twists the railroad ties and he kills all the cattle and he levels the fields and he burns the houses, so that even if ever someone came back and tried to make a go of it in that town, they don't have a chance. They're starting from negative a million. And by the time that we do get a chance with so many people, the enemy has had so long to waylay them that then if you think it's going to happen in a serve day, if you think you're going to nail it in one day, that you're going to get Rebekah back from all those things she went through in the one serve day, it's crazy. And ministry doesn't end up being deep enough, intense enough, long enough, thick enough. But you do see that in what happened with Anna. And you do see that in all those things. And it takes being willing to go the distance. And what's really crazy about that is when churches start to talk about how bad the world is, that is exactly what's required, is exactly what Jesus did. Like Jesus spent 3 years with those guys and then still with the Holy Spirit. And so we're not doing it Jesus' way. The world isn't rejecting Jesus. They're rejecting people who, in the name of Jesus, won't act like him because they're yearning for him, just like Rebekah was.
Well, and what they're bucking off of is a watered down version of what Jesus did.
Yes.
Because it isn't even like he walked with them for 3 years.
Yeah.
And that isn't what we usually do with people.
No.
And so then it's, we were at a leadership meeting this last Sunday night with different leaders from our church and another group. But that was one thing that came up was, there's a lot of new people at the church, and like some people are excited, some people are overwhelmed, because it just means growing by 50 people means you don't get to know everyone the same way. Yeah. And so then what does that mean for an evangelist who wants to walk with these people, not over just checking in on a Sunday morning, but walk with these people throughout the week? It's hard because really walking with a group of people or with a person, it takes time. And Jesus gave 3 years of his life to walk with these guys. We usually I feel like this is Attack of the Serve Day, and that's not what I intended, but more just, I'm just using it as an example. Evangelism is inconvenient. It's not easy. And the conversation needs to be restructured, and not in how do we fit it in a box that best serves the missionary or the minister, the person doing the evangelizing. The other thing that stood out to me in what she was saying was, and nowhere in that narrative was Anna or the people of evangelizing Rebekah doing things that served them. It was meals, it was after hours, it was things that cost them something for her sake. It served her narrative. It met her where she was. Oftentimes it's around our schedule or what works for us. So it's meet me before church to get coffee, and I'm going to steal you away to church. Or it's, we can just meet at youth group or before youth group, or it's what fits within our box and our narrative. It fits within our serve day versus what actually would serve a community, or it would serve a young person, or what would serve that person that we're evangelizing. We don't often frame ministry within that context.
Yeah, so this is really a wonderful conversation. Wonderful to hear from Rebekah. And we're hitting on in some of these last episodes just the power of being invited into ministry. That when the Holy Spirit comes into our lives, we are outfitted for ministry. We get from consumption to the point where compassion starts to fill our hearts and we go out to care. It's the Holy Spirit that leads us into all these things. So I want to make one last appeal here, is that June 1st through 3rd, the Love Your City Conference will be focused on living a life of love, which is really about these things.
There'll even be a session on this evangelism conversation.
Yeah, there'll actually be almost a whole day, including an evening with ministry. So the cool part about this is, like, if you're into this kind of stuff, that's a great place for you to belong. But also, don't be afraid to reach out to us at info@boytheball.com if you have any other thoughts or ideas. And, this is just our chance to grow into this and see all kinds of exciting stories come about like Rebekah's.
Mhm.